You are listening to Hit Play, Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active, performance-minded women. I am your host, Celine Yeager. Each week, I bring you advice from athletes, scientists, researchers, and other experts to help you feel and perform your best no matter what your hormones are doing. This show is a production of Feisty Media. Hello, strong, feisty women. I hope you all are well. So this week, I am stoked to welcome back protein and fat loss researcher Dr. Bill Campbell to unpack early findings from his female fitness menopause survey, which may be the largest menopause fitness survey to date and which many of you contributed to, so thank you for that. The survey was designed to finally study women who actively train, and in the end, he had 4,149 women complete the survey, and though he's still working on the data, he's able to talk about some nuggets that he's presented thus far. So we dive into what thousands of fit midlife women report about calorie and protein intake, hormone therapy use, and the widely felt but very poorly studied experience of weight loss resistance during peri and post-menopause. We also explain why hormone therapy use appears far higher in active women than national estimates, how muscle quality and protein appears to decline even before we notice muscle loss, and why high-intensity interval work may be especially promising for reducing deep visceral fat. That's that abdominal fat around your organs that we try to get rid of, especially post-menopause. Bill is a professor of exercise science and a director of the Performance and Physique Enhancement Laboratory at the University of South Florida. He is also a certified strength and conditioning specialist from the National Strength and Conditioning Association and former president of the International Society of Sports Nutrition. He has published over 200 scientific papers and abstracts, 3 textbooks, and 20 book chapters in areas related to physique enhancement, sports nutrition, resistance training, and dietary supplementation. And I am very happy to have him doing work in menopause for sure. You can learn more about him and his work at billcampbellphd.com. I will put a link to that in the show notes, of course. Just a couple of little notes when we get into the part about weight loss resistance. Bill talks about the laws of thermodynamics. Basically, if you burn more than you take in, weight loss happens. But as we've done entire shows on, and I will link Dr. Jody Duche's episode, which I think is the best show I've ever done on the topic, in the show notes. Because, as we've always talked about, that is complex and complicated on both sides of that equation. But what he's really saying and how he's defining weight loss resistance for our purposes is, you know, it's always worked for managing your weight throughout your life in the past, and now it's not working. He also mentions using the straw criteria for his survey, which I just wanted to clarify for those who are unfamiliar, is a standardized framework to define the stages of reproductive aging from premenopause to postmenopause. We had a couple of little internet glitches that I think got all sorted out, but please excuse a little bump or two. And most importantly, stay tuned for my outro after the show, because after I digested it all, I decided I wanted to come back and give some practical takeaways. So those will be at the end of the convo before I tell you who's up for next week. So I appreciate Bill for stepping in this space, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Very quickly, before we get into it, as always, give us a follow at Feisty Menopause on Instagram and Facebook. Head to the show notes and sign up for my free weekly Feisty 40 Plus newsletter with all the training and nutrition news you can use, and join our free private Hit Play Not Pause Facebook group to keep the conversation rolling. Thank you for the latest great reviews and ratings. I recorded a couple of these episodes in the new year before the break, and between those recordings and the new year, we actually did reach our 2025 goal of hitting 700 ratings, and we're over that now. So love to you all. You're awesome. All right, very end here. Quick thanks to Previnex for coming on for another full year of supporting the show. Their joint and muscle health plus products keep us keeping on. So thank you, Previnex. I appreciate you for all the work you do and for your support of this show since pretty much the beginning. All right, enough of me. Let's have a few words about our awesome sponsors and get on with the show. All right, my friend Bill, welcome back to the show. I have to say that your episode last year was, I think, the #1 downloaded episode, so good to have you back to start off this year.
I'd love to hear that. That we're gonna have to make this every year or a series of sorts.
Yes, yes, to kick off things because you're doing, and I do appreciate you're doing a lot of work in this area, and it's great, and I'm loving to follow it. So, why don't you give us a little high level recap of what you've been up to since we spoke last time? I know you were launching your menopause fitness survey then. I shared it with my audience. You've done some preliminary analysis, which you've presented. So, tell us a little bit, catch us up with when, like, it's been a year.
Yeah, so 2025 was the year that we released the what I believe is the largest ever menopause fitness survey. And the reason it's the largest is
Okay.
because it's the first one. Nobody's done that before, which I may have said this last year, but it's amazing that there's tons of studies, thousands of studies on menopause, a lot of studies on fitness, and fortunately today, even a lot of studies on female fitness. But when you try to merge those two, it is void, which I know you're in the industry, you've written books, so you know this as well. But the scientific inquiry into people like you, people like my wife, I'm sure all of the people that you serve and that follow you, there is nothing. So we did a general fitness survey. We tried to, and we made it general, and we looked at like some big topic areas. So nutrition, fitness, like cardio, resistance training, HRT use. Because I'm a fat
Hmm.
loss researcher, there was a section on weight loss resistance. And I think that was pretty much it. So, yeah, so those main sections. And we're just now at the point where we're starting to write up the manuscripts and submitting them to journals. And the way that the publication process works, you present your preliminary data at an academic conference, which we did last summer. And we were able to analyze calorie data, protein intake, hormone therapy usage. So we've already published in abstract form some of that content, and now we have the full sample size. So we're analyzing that now, and we're about to submit probably within the next 2 weeks the first paper. We're going to get 5 or 6 papers out of this. The first one's just the what we call a methods paper. So what did we do? How did we do it? What questions did we ask? Things like that.
Outstanding. Well, so let's talk about what we can, what you have presented and give us some insight. So let's go with the first one. What did you find out about calorie and protein intakes in this population?
Yeah, so we surveyed women, I think, from 30 to 75, and we had them
Okay.
self-categorize themselves as either premenopausal, perimenopausal, or postmenopausal. And for the people who are into this, the science of this, it's the perimenopausal stage is it's it's tough because there's no blood marker, there's no objective criteria to define that. So we use something from the straw, I think it's the straw
Yep.
criteria. So if you're familiar with that, so
Yep.
it's just basically it's objective as you can get based on menstrual
Yep.
cycle objective criteria to say, hey, I'm clearly not in postmenopause yet, but I'm also not premenopausal. So
Yep.
as we talk about this, I'm going to talk about what did younger premenopausal women say, what did perimenopausal women report, and then postmenopausal. And I was pleasantly surprised with the calories and protein data. Let's start with the calorie data. The premenopausal women ate the most calories, but not by much. They were at on average about 1,850 calories per day. Next was the perimenopausal women, 1,825, so virtually the same. Postmenopausal women, a little lower than that. They were at 1,750 calories per day. But I was worried that we would get this, 1,200, 1,300, like,
Right.
the typical, or at least hopefully it's historically typical, starving myself,
Yep.
constant dieting. We didn't see that at all. And it's also very important to say that I have to acknowledge selection bias with this survey. So let's just talk about that for a moment. I obviously promoted this on my Instagram, my social media. You probably helped spread the word
Yep.
on yours,
Yep.
as did a lot of other people. So who do we reach? Well, we reach an audience that's generally fit. Well, they had to be fit to even take the survey, but the problem with selection bias is we may have oversampled a particular demographic. So maybe people on, let's just say everybody saw this through Instagram because that's my social media. Maybe people that are on Instagram have more money. I don't know if that's true. Maybe they lift weights more, et cetera. So we just have to acknowledge the data we're going to share. There was selection bias because it was given out by me through my social media, you through your social media, et cetera. But that also gives us an advantage because we want to reach women who embrace a fitness lifestyle. So they had to have at least lifted weights to even qualify for this survey. And by the way, we got, I don't know, 4 or 5, I can't remember exactly, but thousands of women responded to this survey and took the survey. So yes, selection bias, but we got the population that we wanted, which nobody's ever really studied, which is women who embrace a fitness lifestyle. So the calorie part of it, I was like, okay, this is great. Now, it wasn't a diet. There were some dieting questions, but it was not a dieting survey. So I'd love to see that. And then with the protein, so I think, I've kind of I dove into the menopause fitness space about 3 years ago, just still drinking from the fire hose every day. One of the things, and I've done.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, well, that makes me feel better. One of the early things I learned is when I did find research on protein intakes in a menopause population, it's absurdly low. Like it's you don't have to be a protein researcher to know that the typical menopause aged woman, at least according to the research, is severely undernourished with protein. The average is like 70 grams per day is what I've been able to find, which is like
is that even hitting the RDA? Probably.
It would depend on their size, but I think it's right on that threshold. It's like 0.8, 0.9. It's like right there, which again.
So not frank deficiency, but from what we know now.
No, not a clinical deficiency, correct. But clearly for the women that I'm trying to serve who want to be fit, who want to increase muscle, bone density, not enough. And again, I can cite research where when researchers, the only thing if they just increase the protein intake in these menopause aged women, they gain muscle, they lose body fat. So when I got this data back, I was like, this is awesome. That means you're doing your job. I'm doing my job. Like the protein intakes, I'll just say what they were, actually wrote these down. 1.65 grams per kg, and I'll convert these to pounds in a moment. So let's just say 1.6 for premenopausal women. I always recommend about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kg, just to give some context. The perimenopausal, 1.63, let's just say 1.6. The postmenopausal woman, 1.53, let's call it 1.5. So didn't reach what I recommend, but I was ecstatic to think, because it wasn't 1.0. And again, science, the way that this data is published, it's grams per kg. In grams per pound, it's about points. I recommend that 1.6 is about 0.75 grams per pound. So perimenopausal woman hitting this threshold that I think we all need. And the postmenopausal just under that, let's probably around like 0.7 grams instead of 0.75. So again, I felt like the evidence-based people who talk about this stuff, the message is clearly getting out there with protein, and I would even say calories.
Yeah, no, that's very heartening. And I mean, the postmenopausal women were a little lower, and it's hard to say what that's a product of. I mean, part of me was like, well, they often get the message they should be eating less, even though we're telling them, like you need to fuel yourself. But those numbers were heartening to me too.
Yeah. And just remind me, do the people that you serve in all of your entities, are they fitness professionals, or are they more the female practitioner who's
both?
Okay.
Both. I mean, everybody everybody in our audience is active, and some of them are coaches, and some of them are athletes, and some of them are both, and some of them are recreational athletes. It's across the board. We have everybody in the audience.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, like I said, I was not what I expected at all because again, just reading research and just like you were saying, even a lot of fitness women don't hit this amount because it's not an easy, for some people it is, but they're rare.
Yeah.
So I was, again, just now we have this data. We're not publishing that data first. We're going to do a whole nutrition paper, but hopefully that's published this year, 2026.
Excellent. So then what did you find with hormone therapy use? And you looked at estrogen and progesterone, right?
Yeah, that's how we defined it. I'd be curious, well, let me ask you this, because you're one of the experts that I look up to in this whole space. I use the word HRT. I see other people say, no, it's menopause, hormone, MHT. What do you, or do you not care? Like, I try to use language to the most people.
I understand. And that has become so many things, Bill, in my opinion, become fights that are unnecessary fights. And it feels like this is one of those unnecessary fights in my opinion. Most women have known it as HRT. They have known it as HRT for a very, very long time. There is a push to say it's not HRT because we're not replacing it. We are using it for menopause purposes. And then you have people who are then fighting back saying, no, we are replacing it because we need it. So it's turned into a battleground, as everything does on the internet. I do not take offense to the term HRT. I think it is common parlance. It's what they use in like other countries pretty much across the board. They've been trying to say MHT, but I just, if I'm honest, I just don't think it rolls off the tongue the same way. And I think people just don't think of it. I think they just say HRT because that's what we have known forever. And when you try to change something, it's so hard to change, common
Yes.
things.
Yep.
So, or just say hormone therapy. Like when I am in the menopause space, I just say hormone therapy because everybody knows what I mean.
Oh, I like that. Plus, that's easier to say, and it's yes.
Sure is.
All right. So what we found, and I'm trying to remember. Well, let me start with a little background. Up until the late 1990s, HRT, hormone therapy, was very common, very prevalent. Then the publication of the Women's Health Initiative, literally overnight, as I read it and understand it, doctors stopped prescribing it, and HRT usage just tanked. The last statistic I think I was able to hear, which was like a 2022 publication, it was like around 6% of women, and again, please tell me if you have different data, 6% of women currently take hormone therapy. So that was my knowledge going into this, and this is probably my favorite.
Study in the Menopause Journal, even lower. They had 4.7, and I've always struggled with that. If I'm honest with you, I don't know if it's that low. I don't know if they're capturing everything, and I think it's because, and that's why I asked if you said estrogen and progesterone or just said hormones, because they were very estrogen based, and I think you would get different numbers if you were more broad with how you're defining hormones. And they don't capture clinics, like private clinics. I don't know if it's 4.7 or 6%. It is still probably lower than what you found or what I think I see in my own audience, which is more similar to what you found.
Yeah, and what you just said, I was just gonna echo. All of the women who are getting compounded hormones, I don't think that's going to be captured in this. So that would include my wife for a while, at least with her progesterone. So yes, so I think we both agree it's low, but it's not as low as what's reported because they're probably not capturing all of the usage.
Yeah.
Now, the number that I'm going to tell
100%.
you was whether it's, let's just say it's the reported 5, maybe, okay, let's triple it to 15.
Right, let's go high.
What we found or what was reported in our survey was 55% of the respondents, which was that is I mean, when we publish this, that's going to be unheard of. So I haven't yet digested this enough because I'm not writing that paper yet, but I'm going to have to come up with some reasons as to why I think it's so much higher in this population, which is why I was excited to talk to you. Why do you think it's so much higher?
Well, because I think you're talking to an audience who is always on the hunt and on the look for things that are ergogenic, who are going to help their performance or make them feel better. And when you have a population who is very in tune with their body and very interested in keeping themselves healthy, fit, strong, performing well, and they hit this transition that is making them very often 75%, maybe 80% having all these troubles, they're going to troubleshoot it. And the first thing that they're going to look for is the gold standard for troubleshooting it, which is hormone therapy. I mean, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, so women, yes, exactly. So women who are investing in the health of their bodies are probably going to be a little more sensitive to a declining performance or how they feel, just by nature of they're attuned to this. So then by nature,
and probably lower tolerance for it.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
So I have a very low tolerance for anything that like gets in the way of my performance. So I just like, I got to fix this. How can I fix this? And when I look at my audience, they're the same ilk. You know, like how do I fix this?
Yes. No, I love that. So yeah, when I first saw and again, this is preliminary, so 55, it's not going to change much when we bring in the last group of subjects, but that is obscenely high compared to what the other publications are. So this will have a big impact. And again, I'll just say selection bias. Yes, of course. But the reality is we don't know. Nobody knows what women embracing a fitness lifestyle do. They haven't been tested before. And I think if we go back 5 years, well, I'll just use myself here. It wasn't even on my or my wife's land, like it wasn't not even in the state of thinking, in the neighborhood.
I'd be very curious what that number would have been if you did it in 2020 when we first started, because a lot of people, even in this audience, and I know a lot of people in my audience took your survey, were still afraid of it. Like a lot of people were still very hesitant, were still afraid, and that changed rapidly. That changed by the time we hit the midpoint of this podcast, which we've been doing going into 6 years now. The conversation had moved very, very quickly, and people were now then starting to be afraid not to use it. Like it flipped a lot.
Well, that was, and forgive me if I mentioned this last time, but when my wife started having just very bad symptoms, she trusted me to do the health research, and I was like, progesterone, that makes sense. That's what our first doctor gave her. And I'm like, well, estrogen, I don't know. Like, I know there's breast cancer risk. Like, I didn't know much, but I knew that. So I did a year of research before I was like, oh. And then, like you said, I'm like, I think there's a greater risk if you don't go on. Like, I think there's much more benefit than the risk. But that took, and again, I'm cautious. So I'm one of the many.
But even the Menopause Society changed that. Like they changed, like when I first started going to their meetings and writing about them, they were still standing on that stage saying lowest dose, shortest amount of time, right? Like that was in 5 short years ago, that was still a message was being put out there, which makes you feel like, oh, this is dangerous, right? Even if they're saying, no, it's beneficial, but they're telling you lowest dose, short amount of time, that raises a little flag in your brain. And then, as they reevaluated, looked at things, that is all changed. All of that has changed. Like there's no more time limit. You don't have to go off of it. Like it's changed so very much. But it's interesting, Bill, because I did a gravel bike, and this is a little tangent, but not much. I did a gravel bike trip last month, and there was there were actually a few doctors on the trip, but there was a doctor on the trip, who is still afraid because of like it was sort of so pushed into them that this was something, because the black box warning, and they don't want the liability, and they don't want, like, there's a very cautious, worried approach. And she made me understand. I used to get frustrated with doctors. I'm like, why won't they give you hormones? And then, like, listening to her and her perspective, I thought, oh, okay, I get it. Like, it's been drilled into you for a very long time, and you first do no harm, and you've been led to understand that there is a harm element to this. And I'm a little more sympathetic than I was, before, about the doctor's position. I do think at this point, if you're going to be treating menopausal women, there is now, you should be getting more specific education in that, and seeing the most updated research. But I get it. I get how it's been so hard to get it into the mainstream with mainstream doctors who have not been specifically trained in menopause recently.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and it's now, again, being in this space for like 4 years, maybe it's my algorithm, but now it's like everybody is promoting, selling, prescribing.
Yeah. But when you step out of that algorithm, I'll tell you, it's not. It's a whole other world. And sometimes that smacks me in the face, and I'm like, oh, that's right. I am inside another world, and you're inside your world, and they don't necessarily intersect. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know, because then that encourages me, and I'm assuming you, like, you don't know who's hearing this for the first time. And like you, like, I have opinions, but I don't ever want to beat somebody down with them, because, again, if I were to say, well, why in the world aren't you, like, well, that was me. Now, again, even at the time when I was going through this, I didn't say absolutely not. I said, hey, I want to do the research on this. It's funny, the Menopause Society. So I've made it I guess, like a promise to myself. I'm very involved in the sports nutrition world. So I'm in an academic society there. Love it. Have a lot of respect for them. But I've chosen to not do any reading of any, again, Menopause Society, I don't know how many there are, until I have opinions from original research studies. And again, that might take me another few years before I even want to go into that world, because what I do know as a scientist, there is a lot of groupthink with organizations.
You would find it very frustrating, my friend.
Okay.
They'll talk about how great exercise is, and then they'll literally say, but you can't tell your patients to lift weights. I mean, it's wild. It's wild.
Wow. Do you know what would be the reason why they couldn't possibly tell a patient?
Because they don't think they will, because because most of them, I'm a little more sympathetic to this too, but I have sat there and, seen a presentation where somebody's like, wow, this person started powerlifting and they really improved their bones, and then her mom started powerlifting and she did too, but we can't tell our patients to powerlift. And it's because, like, that's just, they don't powerlift. They powerlifting is a strange thing. Those worlds just haven't melded very well at this point. We're talking those silos. Everybody is still really siloed. And I think that I heard the same words coming out of someone's mouth about high intensity exercise, like sprint intervals. And they're just like, yeah, but our patients are not going to do that. I'm like, well, have you tried? Have you tried to at least suggest a trainer? Have you just maybe? People might get angry with me for saying this, but it is very pharmaceutical still driven. The meetings are there's a lot of pharmaceutical driven. There's just not, those of us in your space and my space, and there's, Carla DiGirolamo and I, we kind of bang our heads against the table a lot. There's a lot of great information coming out of there. They do very good work, but when it comes to the true lifestyle stuff, it's just not. And maybe it's because, like you're saying, there's not 12 randomized controlled trials to talk about it. So it gets left out of the conversation.
Yeah, I found an estrogen patch trial. That might have been, I know
we talked about that, didn't we?
Well, you might have been the expert that I used in my research review. Like, I know we probably did last time, but estrogen's anabolic, essentially, when you look at a randomized controlled trial. Yes. So that really got my wife excited. And Actually, no, she didn't. She had started her estrogen before I even brought that study to her. And estrogen did not melt off pound, like it didn't do anything for body fat for her.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, I would say it probably didn't feel as great, at least initially. But she goes, like, one thing, I am definitely stronger, and I feel my muscles coming back. And that was early. And I'm like, huh. And then I found, yeah, and then
Huh.
I found the randomized control trial. I'm like, whoa, there's evidence. I mean, you're not the only one to to think this.
Yeah, and it's something that maybe I had it on a note to talk about when we talk about the weight loss resistance. But one of the, there's a lot of arguing online about how much estrogen does or does not contribute to muscle loss that may or may not happen during menopause, even though this is something that they talk about at the Menopause Society too, that lean mass definitely declines during menopause. But one of the things that I'm keeping an eye on now, Bill, is muscle quality, because even if the exact percentages are lost, the frank loss that happens with menopause isn't isn't great in everyone. There's a very interesting arm of research looking at the decline of power, the change of muscle fibers, the infiltration of fat into muscle, like the muscle quality and the muscle function is declining in ways that I think isn't getting captured, but women are experiencing. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I just read just the abstract. It was a pretty recent publication, but it was power declines much quicker in women, middle-aged women, than strength.
Yes, I wrote about that.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So that was like, and there's an argument, obviously, for, I mean, if you want to say powerlifting, but just lifting weights, and doing fast things like sprinting. Like those are the things
Yeah.
that help prevent that loss. So that's, yeah. That's a good point, though, that you're saying that's probably not being captured.
Yeah, a lot of it isn't being, because everything gets conflated, because there is a difference between the neuromuscular drive and the hypertrophy of the muscle. I mean, all these things, yes, it's all part of muscle, but there's a lot going on. And I think it's hard. I think we sometimes lose the forest for the trees. I know we do. I see the arguments. I'm like, yeah, but women are experiencing this, and it's because of all of these things. It's because of inflammation. It's because their power is decreasing. It's because their muscle quality is maybe not as good, and their fat is increased. Like, it's all together, and to try to tease out every little element, it doesn't matter to them. What matters to them is like, how can I feel? How can I feel and perform better?
I want to ask your opinion on this. So I'm personally, and I don't usually say this, but it probably comes out, but I'm personally very pro hormone therapy. Changed the quality of my wife's life overnight, just getting progesterone, like insane. Why didn't we do this earlier? What is my thinking? Estrogen, I don't think there's any debate that it helps bone density. And I think the
No
scientists
debate. It's FDA approved for it.
Yep.
Yep.
The debate is, what does it do for prevention of dementia? Does it optimize brain health? That's a debate I think the scientists
Yep.
have. Cardiovascular disease, it's a
Yep.
debate. So debate means it could
Yep.
be positive, and then there's an argument. No, I can show some studies that.
Yeah, and the cardiovascular piece, I think, is getting more clear. I mean, even the Menopause Society is just like, if used within sort of that window before
Yes.
you develop any sort of cardiovascular disease, it's a net benefit. It does seem to be protective. How much, people can fight about that, but it does seem to be protective.
Well, and the reason for my question, again, I have my personal beliefs, but publicly, I'm not ready to say you should do this. How do you, like, are you unabashedly pro hormone therapy? Like,
I am such a I have a very hard time being hard stance on anything, honestly, Bill. That's not my nature. I have become, I will tell you, much more pro hormone therapy than I was when I started this. Quite a bit more, and I use it myself. I think where I fall, however, is that I do know there are people in my community who will say, you cannot age well without it. And they fight. They fight like crazy. And sometimes I have to shut off comments because people are getting mean. And I'm like, stop fighting. Because I do know what women who are legitimately thriving without it. They are. And we know that about 20% of women, don't really report a whole lot of symptoms. And we don't understand still what is happening at the level of the receptors and how much estrogen those women might still be producing and how sensitive they are to it and how their body has adapted. I mean, everybody is very, very different with their hormonal journey. I do think, in my very personal opinion, most women will probably benefit from it. But does that mean that you cannot thrive without it? I don't believe that. I think if you can't or don't want to use that, there are other ways. There's other ways to support yourself. I think some women literally would just be fine. Some women feel terrible on it. And I'm really, really sympathetic to those when they hear that constant drumbeat of like, you're going to turn to dust and be frail and be demented, like all these things if you don't use it, because it's not, that's not really necessary. In my opinion, I think that there are other ways to take care of yourself. It might be more work,
Yep.
or not, but that's where I come down on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I always have that same, and I don't ever want to, I don't want to hurt feelings, but I know that there's women who can't take it. So if that's all they hear me say, well, that's not very and just like you, a lot of women I always use the word, they breeze through this phase of life. There's not many of them. And then the opposite
Some
is
do.
true. Yeah, some do. But
if your life is being turned upside down, man, like, hormone therapy is, in my opinion, first line. And if for some reason you cannot take it, there are other things, but it's gotten, the dosages are so you can modulate them so much now. There's so many levers you can pull and take it transdermally or take it this way or take it that way. There's a lot of ways you can approach it. It takes some trial and error for some women, but by and large, what I see in the group, what I see in my world, what I see in the literature, it just supports that the net benefit for most women is there.
Yes. Oh, just a little side note. So my wife's former, I don't want to say former if she's not former. Yeah, former doctor was not in a menopause specialty, and we would pay X amount. She switched to, hey, I'm a menopause provider. Her rates went up for an office visit by like fivefold. I'm not joking. That's why I said former.
I know. I'm sorry, I just laughed. It was just like my release of tension because that's, my God. That's just bizarre. I mean, it's not surprising. Nothing surprising, but boy, oh boy.
Well, to me, because I always sit in on it, I'm like, she's pretty, or he or she, this physician, they were pretty good as a non-menopause specialist. Like that's a fair rate. And then when you're going to claim menopause provider expert, I'm like, nope. Like, yeah, I've talked to, she's not that level, or that physician was not at that level yet. So just a personal anecdote to, I don't know what you would call that, but I just wonder if your audience has experienced that as well. Cause I was like, the service hadn't changed at all. It was just the classification.
But there's money to be made.
Yeah. So
yeah, yeah, we definitely see that. So let's segue, because I want to make sure we have some time to talk about the weight loss piece, since that is a big part of your specialty is fat loss. You also looked into self-reported weight loss resistance, and what did you find there?
Yeah, so let me give a little background to that. So this is the area that gives me the most, I have the most passion around this area, because I've done fat loss my entire career. I started in obesity, and then I tested some of the elite level female physique competitors. So I've done this for over 20 years. Actually longer than that if you go back to my grad school days. So just body fat, preventing it. And I'd say my lab has specialized in helping people lose fat while maintaining lean mass, because a lot of people will lose muscle when dieting And I've spent a
Yep.
large part of my career coming up with or validating strategies that say, no, if you maintain your muscle, this is going to give you lasting weight loss success. So that's just a little background for anybody that doesn't know what I've done. So when we use the word weight loss resistance, the way that I'm going to define that is and from a menopause perspective, the things that used to work, like a caloric deficit or exercise to lose body fat, no longer seem to be working like they used to work. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't lose fat or weight at all, but the level of a caloric deficit that you need to revert to is not in any way sustainable, and based on my expertise, not a way that will maintain lean mass. So that's what I'm defining here. And now we have to go, because this is where in my world people fight and people send me mean messages, because I've been an energy balance person. I'm an energy balance person. You won't find any research that violates the energy balance model of calories in, calorie. You won't find it. Actually, if you look at the sleep deprivation literature, you will find an example. And guess who suffers from lack of sleep quality or sleep deprivation? Women in menopause. But going back to now that we defined it, so you can't lose weight using the things that you used to do. They're just not as effective. I need to say that anybody who's ever tried to lose fat believes that they are weight loss resistant during the process. And I can confidently say that because I'm a fat loss researcher. I'm usually humble, but I won't be now. There's not many people on this planet who have read more fat loss research than me, who've published more than me. And when I go on a diet, sometimes I think, oh, something's wrong. That's the last thought I should have. I know the research, I know the science, and I struggle with, wow, like this isn't working. And it always works if you just give it time. So I want to start with that. Everybody thinks that they have weight loss resistance. So the numbers in our survey, we asked, hey, do you feel that you're experiencing weight loss resistance under the definition that I gave? And I'm just going to give approximate numbers. Approximately 70% of premenopausal women said, yes, I have weight loss resistance. 75% of perimenopausal women, and then 80% of postmenopausal women. So the peri and post had a significantly higher, so it reached the threshold of statistical significance. They believe that they have weight loss resistance. Now, again, this was a survey. We're just asking them, do you feel you have this based on this definition? It doesn't mean that it exists, but I think it was very validating for a lot of the women that I communicate with once we published this to say, oh, at least I'm not the only one. And since we've been doing this research, I found another older survey. They didn't ask the same question, but it's been documented before in a menopause population about not being able to lose body fat. So there's the data.
Yeah, and I think that. Did you have something else to say about that before I?
No, I'm just waiting to hear what you think about that data. I will say, I thought it would never be that high in any of the groups. In theory, if 70% of premenopausal women, again, they have theoretically normal hormonal environments. I don't think I don't believe that it's that high, but I'm also not willing to say it doesn't exist because obviously I'm investing a lot of time in my lab and my lab's resources to investigate this phenomenon. And for the people who just will message me and say, you're not a scientist, I'm like, well, nobody's ever. Do you know of any study where this has actually been studied in this population? I'm not aware. Again, these are women in fitness, and a lot of these women, I think we have this data. I don't have the statistics, but they track their macros. And if you're tracking your macros, yeah, you might not be perfect, but you're probably pretty close and have a sense of, I used to lose weight at 1,500 calories. I'm not losing weight at 1,500, at 1,400. So that's anecdotal, but I think it deserves somebody to put this to the test in a research setting?
There's so much going on, and we could do a full 3 hour, even longer kind of podcast on this topic alone, I think, just because, even as, like, I'll say, just even as an athlete, there's so much that happens that affects your weight. And I'm not talking fat, I'm talking weight. I could do a mountain bike stage race, and, like, you would think that you would lose weight, but with the inflammation and all the stuff that goes on, you come back and you're heavier than you started sometimes that week after. Your body is just all messed up. And, there's just so many things happening. And when you look at women in general, like, their hormonal journey is, even premenopause, different than a man's is. And when you get into menopause, I mean, we know that, the visceral fat specifically, it goes from 5 to 8% premenopause, and this is researched, to 15 to 20% postmenopause. Like, that is a really big change in visceral fat, right? So a woman is going to feel that, even if she doesn't, like, weigh herself, she's going to feel like her body is resistant to losing weight if that fat has migrated in her body and feels intractable. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's a lot of the research as a fat loss researcher that I've been seeking out. It's even like you're saying, even if you aren't gaining body fat, which again, I would say the best designed studies to answer that question report that you do gain fat. But even if you didn't, you still have a migration of fat to the midsection that is clearly a different body shape. So yes, perceptively, and I'm not saying it's just perceptive, but just perceptive, just in perception, it's clearly something's different, something's changing.
And everybody, I mean, that is the number when I go to the Menopause Society meetings, when I go into my hip play, not pause, we got 36,000 women in there. The far and away, head and shoulders, more than anything else, people are concerned with is the weight that seems to have appeared overnight that will not leave. I mean, so I get frustrated when people are like, oh, you're just not moving as much or you're eating more, because it's just like these women, like you said, they've been tracking, they have 30 years of Training Peaks logs, they have all this stuff. It's frankly, Bill, insulting, and it makes me very angry when I hear that, because I have friends, I mean, it's sort of like we talked about before, that bike racing friends who had to buy new kits and left the sport because they couldn't fit in their stuff anymore, and within a very short amount of time. Nothing had changed. They hadn't just gotten off their bike or so. It was, if that's not hormonal, I don't know what is.
Yeah, and what you're impressing is
they go up bra sizes.
Yeah. If they're cyclists, they're in this community, they would know if they're training, if their competition schedule is changing. And again, you're saying no. And again, that backs up what I hear a lot. But I think you share my frustration, because show me the data. Well, nobody has ever attempted to take these women that are embracing a fitness lifestyle. Also, on this note, my wife makes this point, because she gets angry when people say you don't lose muscle going through menopause, when her N size of 1 says otherwise. When you actually when you spent 10 years building muscle, you might losing that. The data we have is not in women that have been lifting 10 or 15 years, that have built up more muscle. That's an unobserved population. So even when you have data that says, this population of 600 women, they didn't lose any muscle, but how many of them lifted weights and built muscle that are sensitive to how much muscle they have? So again, I always want to go back to when we're reading menopause research in our world, this is what I tell my research team. We always have to ask the question, was the study designed to answer the question from the population that we care about? And the answer is always going to be no. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to have a different outcome. I'm not saying that. But you can't say, yeah, women that lifted weights for 15 years, they don't lose any muscle. That's not, it may be true, but you can't, that they have not been studied. So I think it makes sense that it's probably, if it makes sense that it's going to happen and they're going to be more perceptive to it. But again, you're in the real world. You're working with athletes. You see it. Like, you don't need a study to tell you, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you said that. Like, as you were talking about that. And this is just like, I was just writing about a study that came out on VO2 max and how, like, female runners actually had they greater loss, and the researchers were just like, well, you had further to fall, and it was an interest. They still had a higher relative level to other people, but they had a greater loss amongst themselves, which I thought was really interesting. And what you're saying is sort of mirroring that. It's interesting.
It's on the muscle. I think it's the same thing. It's just on the muscle mass side of the discussion. So.
And muscle also helps drive VO2 max. There's a lot going on here, that is not been captured.
Yeah. And I want to say something that I wanted to say earlier, but I guess I hope your audience loves you and appreciates you, but you are so knowledgeable on this. Like, when you send me articles sometimes, and I'm like, why didn't I find that article? I so appreciate your expertise, your breadth of knowledge. And again, I love how you're, like, in the real world working with athletes, because I'm not in that space. So, but anyway, I just wanted to tell you, you are one in a million in terms of your knowledge of the research. And then you pair that with you're out actually on the, I don't know what your lingo is, the road, the track, what's the, whatever the cycling lingo is.
Oh yes, the trails, all of it. Yep.
Yes. So you are literally one in a million in terms of your knowledge base on this from embracing a fitness lifestyle perspective. You are it.
I appreciate that, because I work very, very hard, and I take the responsibility very seriously. I do. And it's, you're on the internet and you know what that looks like. And I'm just like, whoo. That's why I don't really fight on the internet. But I do appreciate that coming from you. Before we sort of move on, I did want to, speaking of, because we worked together on something recently that I wanted to touch on too, that came out, where you looked at the effective ways for fat loss and menopause, with the kind of training that seemed to be most beneficial, as far as, like, high intensity training for fat loss. Can we talk about that for a bit?
Yeah. Just to give that a little background. So, I'm trying to think I'm just interested in everything menopause. Muscle first, probably cardiovascular health second, just in terms of my expertise in training. And I think I read a study on when they actually compared. I'm just going to categorize this initially as high intensity interval training, and then I'll refine that in a few seconds and call it sprint interval training. But high intensity interval training is the broad category, at least in my mind. And they compared it to zone 2 steady state cardio. And that study caused significantly more abdominal fat loss in menopause women. So, as we've already discussed, and as I'm a fat loss researcher, I know that abdominal fat it's something that a middle-aged woman many will have to experience, that younger women won't, that men won't, as much as this contracted menopause transition phase. So I read that study. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, let me see what else is out there. Then I found a second, then I found a third, then I found a fourth. And I think there were 5 studies, 4 or 5, that actually compared zone 2 steady state against high intensity. And I think a better term is sprint interval training. I know I'm in your world. And in every single one, I think maybe with one exception, but I don't even think so. I think every single one that made this comparison, the sprint interval training caused significantly more visceral and abdominal fat loss compared to zone 2 steady state cardio. Now, real quick, I don't hate zone 2 steady state cardio. I think
I don't either.
you should do it if you like. But man, when I talk about this, people just assume that I hate zone 2. I don't hate zone 2. I love zone 2. Well, actually, I don't. I'm not gonna lie. But if you
I
like,
love zone 2, so we're fine.
okay, good. I don't really like any cardio, so that's why I say that. But yeah, it's rare in research to have multiple studies all with the same outcome, especially in something like on body composition and fat loss. Like that's, so I was, and again, you were kind enough to be the expert in making this applicable. So what was new to me, you're like, yeah, we've known this for, you've known this for years. I think the study that I featured wasn't that old. I think it was the latest one. I don't know if it was 2020. Was it? No?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so
No, it wasn't that old.
Yeah, so yeah, to me, I'm a scientist. If somebody says, well, what can I do to reduce this belly fat if a menopause went well? I was like, well, first of all, be active, but, research, I have to tell you what I know, and there's a specific type of exercise that seems to target that better than any other form of cardio.
And in the fat loss space, do you have an idea what might be driving that?
So our bodies have different types of fat receptors. So two broad types, beta adrenergic receptors, and we have alpha adrenergic receptors. So beta I think of as beautiful, because when they get stimulated, when catecholamines bind to a beta adrenergic receptor on our fat cells, that will break down fat. So that's what we want if the goal is to lose fat. The alpha adrenergic receptors, I think of them as awful in this regard. They have a very good use in the body, but for fat loss, they're awful, alpha adrenergic receptors. And it seems like this visceral fat has a greater density of beta adrenergic receptors. So when you're exercising intensely, like sprint interval training, you're producing a lot more catecholamines, particularly norepinephrine. So effectively, you are physiologically producing more of the agonist, as we would say in biochemistry, that can bind to this greater density of the receptors on visceral fat. And so there's the best mechanism. There's another mechanism that's a little more inflammation related, but it's to me it's not as cut and dry as that first one. I think it was adiponectin, so that's a hormone that our fat cells will produce. Adiponectin levels tend to get higher with this type of training, and that may have a role in reducing. But I think the stronger mechanism is just what visceral fat gives us, which is a greater density of the types of fat receptors that are more receptive to what high-intensity interval training provides.
Excellent. That was a great explanation. Thank you for that.
Yes.
So is there anything, as we come to the top of the hour here, is there anything that we haven't talked about in this round of our conversation that you wanted to make sure that we covered?
I'll just say what my lab's working on now. So I already mentioned we're going to start writing up our menopause fitness survey studies. And now we're going to literally just met with my executive team today for a couple hours. We're designing a menopause weight loss resistance study. So we're going to recruit self-proclaimed or self-identified weight loss resistance menopausal women. So this would be in a pretty narrow window. So you have to be in peri or postmenopause. I think it's 6 years postmenopause. So probably about an 8-year period. So typically late 40s to late 50s, somewhere in there. So these will be women that we want who say, I don't think I can lose weight as much as I've could in the past. And we're going to put them on an identical diet that we used in the past in premenopausal women. So same exact diet and same exact macronutrients, same exact protocols. And we're going to compare. So we're actually using It's not a randomized controlled trial. It's a little less than that because we're using an existing database, but we're going to match the weight loss outcomes of these menopause weight loss or these menopause aged women to see, did it take them longer, shorter, or the same amount of time to lose 5% of their body weight. So it will be the first quasi-experimental study investigating, hey, does weight loss resistance exist? So that's going to dominate my life for the next year.
I'm very interested in that. That's a cool trial. And I guess I kind of lied before I let you go. I do want to, if I were to ask you, based on everything that you have put together here and what you've learned, maybe the top 3 to 5 tips for maintaining, improving body composition during this time of life, what would you say?
I would say resistance training would be the foundation of your fitness program. Now, again, just hear people, does that mean cardio is not important? No, but I look at like 3 areas. You want to have resistance training. You want to optimize your cardiovascular system, your VO2 max, optimize that, and you want to optimize your power production so that we're preventing those things. So the first would be resistance training needs to be a part of your fitness routine. So that would be 1. 2, make sure that protein is optimal, and that, just to give people a recommendation, if you take your ideal body weight, multiply that by 0.75, and that's a great place to set your protein intake goal. And then a third, I would say, specific to a menopause population, I would say consider hormone therapy. Doesn't mean you have to do it, but what I want to avoid, which I get a lot, or not a lot, but I get it more often than I would want to, is conversations with women where they're not even allowing it to be considered and they don't know why, other than it's just not natural. So at least be open to it, because 1, if you do have symptoms, you can literally eliminate the symptoms. 2, we know that it helps with bone mineral density. I can give you research to say it will help build muscle or maintain muscle. And then, of course, there may be cardiovascular benefits. There may be brain benefits throughout the rest of your life. So the 3, lifting weights, protein, and being open to the idea of hormone therapy.
Outstanding. All right. Well, I will have to have you back on after another year so we can talk about what you find with your latest research. But I always appreciate you. I appreciate your curiosity and your willingness to speak in this space. I think you're an important voice. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Okay. As promised, I wanted to unpack a couple of nuggets from that conversation. First, when Bill said calories in, calories out doesn't seem to work when you're sleep deprived, my ears perked up, but then I dropped the ball on pulling on that thread as the conversation went on. So I circled back with him and asked him what research he was referring to. I thought I knew, but I wanted to make sure that I was pulling the right studies. And he said there was a study where they put subjects on the same diet for several weeks, but the group that was sleep deprived lost significantly less body fat than the adequate sleep group, even though they had the same diet and activity levels. And I looked up his report on the study, and worse, the sleep-deprived group also lost more lean mass, even when the calorie intake and energy expenditure were the same. And importantly, this wasn't some crazy sort of keep them up all night study that they often do. The sleep-deprived folks got 5 hours and 15 minutes of sleep versus 7.5 for those quote-unquote not sleep-deprived. So those are a little more real-life situation numbers, in my opinion. Bill concluded that the lesson from this study was that if you're going to diet and not get adequate sleep, you're literally wasting a lot of effort and time and not getting the fat loss outcomes. And I mean, there's a lot to unpack there when you consider how many women struggle with sleep during this time. So I will drop that study in the show notes so you can check it out for yourself. Secondly, he devoted one of his newsletters to high-intensity and sprint interval training for menopause fat loss. I contributed to that, but I realized that not everyone would have seen that. It's a paid subscription newsletter. So I wanted to just clarify the definitions he was working with when he was talking about high intensity and sprint interval training for menopause fat loss. For high intensity interval training, he's talking about exercise that alternates between high intensity efforts and recovery periods. So the intensity is high, usually around 80 to 90% of maximum heart rate, hard but sustainable for several minutes. The duration is usually about 30 seconds to a few minutes of work. And then like an example of that would be 1 minute of hard cycling at 85% max heart rate, followed by 2 minutes of easy pedaling, and you repeat that for say 6 to 10 rounds. Sprint interval training is a more extreme form of high intensity interval training, and it involves all out maximal sprints. So you're looking at efforts performed at 100 to 150% of VO2 max, just as hard as possible. The durations are very short. We're talking 5 to 30 seconds. Generally just under 30, around 10 to 20. Example of that would be 15 to 30 seconds of all-out maximal cycling, followed by 4 minutes of very light recovery, and you repeat that 4 to 6 times. So depending on what type of training you're doing, you can do 2, maybe 3 sessions of that a week. You always want to make sure you're recovered. Okay, so I just wanted to clarify all that. And now for real, that was our show. So come on back next week when I sit down with our new Women's Performance Podcast host, Dr. Erin Ayala, and we talk about exercise addiction and lots to untangle there. And well, probably guilty as charged. So come on back for that one. And until then, as always, stay feisty. You have been listening to Hit Play Not Pause, a feisty menopause podcast for active performance-minded women. I'm your host, Celine Yeager. This show is edited and produced by the most amazing Carrie Barrett and the other talented, strong women at Feisty Media. Follow us on social media at Feisty Menopause, and please help us spread the word. Screenshot and share this episode on your social media channels with the tag @FeistyMenopause. And please subscribe, like, review, and rate this show wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth and good reviews make it easier for other listeners to find. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay feisty.